I know personally the shortcomings of the war on drugs. My father was an addict himself, and he was a victim of the crack epidemic of the 80s and 90s. He always told me that if he had known and been aware of the effects and repercussions of crack cocaine, he never would have used it. This is actually not uncommon. The war on drugs has pushed drug users into violence, crime, and a stigma that only reinforces their actual drug use. It does not help. As 50 years of results has shown, the war on drugs has failed. The answer is decriminalization. Can we dare to legalize drugs? In America, we represent 6% of the world population, but somehow we do 68% of the drugs that have been produced in the world. 50 years of failure describes the war on drugs. The term war on drugs was coined after President Nixon in a 1971 press conference in which he stated that the illegal drug trafficking and drug abuse was public enemy number one. He then vowed that he would put money into military operations that would stop the drug trafficking and put money into prevention. The United Nations Single Convention on Narcotic Drugs stated that their proposed goal was to identify the illegal drug trade and decrease the use of drugs. None of the projected goals have actually been met. Actually, the exact opposite has happened. People are continuing to use more drugs in a trend that continues to go up. There is no decline in this. The answer, as I said before, is legalization. A report by the UNODC, the United Nations Office of Drugs and Crime, praised Sweden for having one of the lowest drug usage rates in the Western world, and they directly attributed that to their liberal view on drugs. They have shops like this where people can actually go and buy cannabis and actually pick up actual drugs in a safe, controlled environment. Money currently funding the war on drugs can then be pumped into other social service programs that have been proven to help. Currently, America is spending $70 billion a year on the war on drugs and producing no results for all the money that is being spent. We actually, in a study published by Harvard economist Jeffrey A. Moran, the annual savings on enforcement and incarceration costs from legalization of drugs would amount to roughly $41.3 billion a year. In the Netherlands, the cafes that just produce marijuana, they produce what is the equivalent of $520 million in tax revenue every year. The war on drugs is creating a cycle that is actually making an underclass in our society. A drug offense can actually prohibit the opportunities that a young American man or woman can receive as far as education, because their grants would not be accepted if they have a drug offense, their voting rights, and their employment, because a drug offense would follow you for your whole employment career. The military operations that the U.S. funds are to spray pesticides like pliohyphate over actual large amounts of vegetation, and they have no idea or actual target of what is actually being hit. But what's being hit is poor farmers' crops. The herbicides have no idea what they are killing. They may think it's coca leaves, but it actually could be killing banana leaves that are actually vital and are the livelihood of poor farmers like this woman here. Environmental consequences resulting from the aerial fumigation have been criticized and as detrimental to some of the world's most fragile ecosystems and cause health problems to the farmers. Dr. David Olson, the former director of conservation science at the World Wildlife Fund, claims the spraying campaign is equivalent to the devastation of Agent Orange in Vietnam, a disturbance the ecosystem and wildlife have never recovered from. In conclusion, the war on drugs has failed. It is only producing multiple failures in our society. And the answer to that would be legalization, which would produce revenue that could go into our economy. It could produce a new mindset within our country. And it could end a lot of the problems of overdosing and so many other things. So I understand that you may not agree with me, but at least I would feel much satisfied if you would understand that the war on drugs has failed.